The fire in the Crow Creek saloon had been burning low since 9 o'clock, and nobody had added wood in over an hour because everyone at the table was watching her husband lose. She had been standing near the door to the back hall. For most of that time, her coat still on, because she had learned, 4 years ago, not to put anything down in a room Holt might need to leave quickly. She watched him the way she had learned to watch him. From the periphery, with her face arranged into something neutral, tracking his shoulders rather than his face, because his face lied and his shoulders did not. His shoulders had been climbing since the 8th hand. There were 5 men at the table. She did not know 3 of them. She knew one was a cattle buyer out of Fort Collins who had ridden in that afternoon with mud on his boots and money in his coat that he seemed comfortable losing, which meant he had more. The man across from Holt had not said much since the game started. He was not young and not old. His coat was clean and his hands were quiet on the table, and he had been winning steadily in the particular way that some men win without appearing to try. Holt put in his pocket watch after the 3rd hand. He put in his horse after the 5th. By the 7th hand, there was nothing left in front of him that she could see, and she had already started calculating, the way she always calculated when Holt reached this point. How many miles to the nearest town with a women's aid society? Whether the cold was the kind that killed or just the kind that hurt, what she had in her coat pockets that was worth anything. She had $3.40, a thimble, and a letter from her sister in Cheyenne that she had read so many times the folds had gone soft. Holt turned in his chair and looked at her. She had seen that look before. Not this exact version of it. Not in a saloon with 5 men watching, but the shape of it. The calculation behind his eyes when he had run out of things that were actually his and had started pricing things that weren't. She did not look away. She had stopped looking away from things 3 years ago, around the time she understood that looking away did not make them not happen. "I've got a wife," Holt said. He said it to the table, not to her. "She keeps a house clean. Good cook. I'll put her contract against the pot. 1 year's service." Nobody at the table said anything for a moment. The cattle buyer set down his cards and looked at the wall. The 3 men she did not know exchanged glances in the way men exchange glances when they don't want to be seen doing it. The quiet man looked at his cards. Then he looked up, not at Holt but at her, with the same steadiness he had been applying to the game all evening. No performance in it. Just a man looking at something he was trying to understand. She met his eyes and did not look away from those either. "Call," he said. Holt laid down his hand like a man who already knew. 2 pair jacks over 6s. She had been watching him long enough to know he had not been holding much since the 4th hand. The quiet man turned over 3 10s without comment. The room let out a breath. Holt pushed back from the table, and she watched his shoulders, and his shoulders said he was going to walk out the door without speaking to anyone, which was what he did when he had moved past anger into something smaller and colder. He pulled his coat from the chair back. He did not look at her. He walked to the door and out of it, and the cold came in for a moment, and then it was gone. Nobody at the table spoke. The quiet man was stacking his winnings slowly. Not in any hurry, she watched him do it. He did not look like a man who had just won something he was pleased about. He looked like a man who had been handed a problem he had not asked for and was now working out how to put it down without causing damage. She pushed off the wall and walked to the table. "How much is in the pot?" she said. He looked up. $42. She did the arithmetic she had already done twice in the last 5 minutes. Train fare to Cheyenne was $31 if she rode coach and didn't eat. Her sister had a room. Her sister had written 2 months ago saying the room was still there if she ever needed it. "That's close to train fare north," she said. "It is," he said. "Close enough, with a week's board somewhere, to get to Cheyenne?" He was quiet for a moment. The cattle buyer had moved to the bar. The 3 other men were doing what men do when they want to pretend they're not listening. "I'll make up the difference," he said. She studied his face. She had learned in 4 years to read the ways men made offers, what was underneath them, what was expected back. She found nothing underneath this one except what it appeared to be, which she did not entirely trust but noted. "I'll need my trunk from the hotel," she said. "It's not heavy. I have a wagon out front." She had her trunk at the hotel desk in 20 minutes, because she had packed it 3 months ago and told herself she was only doing it to feel better. The wagon was where he'd said it would be. He loaded the trunk himself and did not comment on how light it was. And she climbed up without waiting for a hand because she did not know yet whether she wanted to get used to taking his. The train station was 6 blocks down the main street. There was a lamp burning in the window, which she had taken for a good sign until she saw the station master's face when they pushed through the door. The man behind the desk was named Stubbs. She had heard someone call him that 2 weeks ago when she'd checked the schedule. He had the look of a person about to deliver news he had already delivered 6 times today and was tired of. "Lines down," he said before they could ask. "Ice storm took out the bridge at Kelso Creek 3 nights back. Nothing's moving north for 6 weeks, maybe 8. She stood at the window and looked at the reflection of the lamp in the glass and thought about 6 weeks and what 6 weeks of board in this town would cost against what $42 plus whatever he made up would stretch to. She heard him behind her, not moving, not speaking. She turned around. "I'll find a boarding house," she said. "Mrs. Denning takes women on the east side of town." "Mrs. Denning's full," Stubbs said, still behind his desk. "She took in the Halverson family last week when their place flooded out, and the Muellers." She looked at the lamp reflection again. "There's a cabin on my property," the man said. "It's separate from the main house, has its own stove." She turned this over the way she turned everything, looking for the corners of it, the places where the stated thing became a different thing. "Separate," she said. "I put the lock in myself," he said. "Keys inside, stays inside." She had no way of knowing if that was true. She had no way of knowing much about him at all, except what she had observed across a card table for 3 hours. And what she had observed was that he had won carefully and left his winnings on the table when he walked away from it, and that when he looked at her face. That was not nothing. "I'll need flour," she said, "and lamp oil, and I'd want to be taken into town on Fridays if I need to be." "The store's open Tuesday and Friday," he said. "I go in most Fridays." She nodded once. "All right." He nodded back, and outside the wind had dropped to a sound like water over stone, and the cold was the kind that killed. The cabin was a 1/4 mile behind the main house, separated by a stand of bare-limbed cottonwoods and a fence that needed mending along its north side. She noted the fence. She noted most things. He carried her trunk to the door and set it down and went to start the stove before she could say she would do it herself. By the time she was inside, a small fire was catching, and the lamp on the shelf above the door was lit, and the room was small and cold and clean in the way a room is clean when no one has been living in it. He showed her where the woodpile was, outside the south wall, and told her the well was shared and 20 yards northeast, and that the main house had a root cellar with more stores than he'd eat through the winter if she wanted to take from it. She listened, and she also watched the way he stood in the door of the cabin, inside the threshold but not past it, with his coat still buttoned, like a man making clear he understood where the line was. "I'll bring flour in the morning," he said, "and lamp oil." "You mentioned lamp oil," she said. He paused. "Anything else you need tonight?" She looked around the room. Bed frame with a rope bottom and a mattress that looked newer than the rest of the place. The stove, the shelf, the lamp. A window with no curtain, a hook on the back of the door, and nothing hanging on it. "A bolt for that window," she said. "Or a latch. I can put it in myself if you have one." "I have one. I'll bring it with the flour." He was gone before she thought to say thank you, which she would have said, which surprised her a little. She closed the door and stood with her hand on it and listened to his footsteps go back across the frozen ground toward the main house, steady and unhurried, not pausing. She had learned to listen for pauses. In the morning, he left the flour and the lamp oil and the window latch on the step outside her door, along with a small pail of milk and a paper twist of salt and a note in plain handwriting that said the root cellar key was on the nail by the milk pail. She read the note twice. Then she put the key in her apron pocket and went to see what the root cellar held. It held more than she'd expected. Potatoes, onions, a good store of dried beans, 3 crocks she opened and determined held apple butter, and a full side of salt pork hanging from the ceiling on a hook. She stood in the cool dark of it for a moment and made a list in her head. What was here, what it would take her through, what she would need to add. She added nothing to the list for him. She knew better than to start counting herself into another person's provisions. She put the key back on its nail when she left, so he would see she had done it. She did not see him for most of that first week. She heard him in the mornings, the sounds of a man working, axe on wood, the clank of the water pump, once the sustained ring of a hammer doing work she couldn't identify from the cabin. He worked in the way some men work, without rush and without stopping, and she found herself tracking the sounds the way she had once tracked Holt's shoulders, not out of fear, out of the habit of knowing where a man was. The difference was that she did not need to know where this one was in order to prepare for something. She noticed when she stopped listening for the axe. She noticed that she had stopped. On the 6th day, she brought a plate of biscuits to the main house door and knocked. He answered it with his sleeves rolled to the elbow despite the cold, and she could tell she had pulled him from some work because there was sawdust on his forearm. He looked at the plate and then at her. "I had extra," she said, which was not entirely true but was not entirely false either. "Thank you," he said, and took the plate, and did not make a conversation out of it, which she appreciated more than she would have said if asked. She was 10 steps back toward the cottonwoods when he called after her. "I don't know your name." She turned. "I know," she said. "I haven't given it." He held her gaze for a moment. He had the quality of a man who was comfortable being told things he didn't know how to answer, which was rarer than people acknowledged. "Fair enough," he said, and went back inside. She walked back to the cabin and stood at her window, which had a latch on it now, and watched the cottonwoods move in the wind, and thought about a man who accepted "fair enough" as a real answer. By the 3rd week, the cold had gone from difficult to serious, the kind that made the wood in the cabin walls speak, and turned the water in the pail to a lid of ice before sunrise. She went through the woodpile faster than she'd planned, and she was out back splitting more one afternoon when he came around the south corner of the cabin and stopped. She did not stop. She had split wood before. She had done most things before. She had learned that the best way to discourage a man from taking something out of your hands was to keep your hands on it. He stood at the corner a moment. Then he said, "The big maul's sharper, it's in the tool shed," and then he left. She went to the tool shed and got the big maul, and it was sharper, and she finished the pile in less time. That evening, he left a small pot on her step with a lid on it. She opened it and found soup, already warm. She stood in the doorway holding the pot and did not know what to do with what she felt about it, which was a new feeling, and she did not examine it closely because she was not sure she was ready to. She ate the soup. It was good. She had been on his property for 31 days the afternoon. She walked to the main house to say something about the roof, which she had seen beginning to sag along the south eave after the last heavy snowfall. She had been thinking about it for 3 days because the kind of sag she was seeing could go one of 2 ways before spring, and one of them involved damage. She knocked and he opened it, and she told him about the roof and why she thought it needed attention before the next thaw. He listened all the way through. This, she had come to understand, was one of his qualities. He did not fill in the end of her sentences or start talking before she had finished. He listened until the silence was hers to fill or leave alone. "I saw it last week," he said. "I was going to look at the north beam this weekend." "It's not the north beam," she said. "The north beam is sound. It's the east crosspiece. The joint is separating." He looked at her. "You know roof joints?" "My father built houses," she said. It was more than she usually said, and she noted the saying of it, the way you note a door you have opened that you have kept shut for a long time. He nodded once, as if she had told him something ordinary and not something she had not told anyone in 4 years. "I'll get up there tomorrow," he said. "Would you come take a look at the joint with me?" If you're willing. She said she would. They spent 2 hours on the roof, the next morning in the cold that had gone crisp and windless overnight. She showed him the joint. He brought the tools he needed. They worked without talking much, and she handed him things when he needed them, and he said which thing. Not please hand me something, but the name of the tool directly, as if her knowing the names was assumed and correct. When they climbed down, she noticed she was not cold, which she took as a sign that the work had been real. You should look at the south fence before spring, she said, because she had been meaning to say it. The posts along the west quarter are healed over. A good thaw and they'll pull the wire. He looked toward the south fence line, not visible from where they stood. How far gone? 3 posts, maybe 4. She paused. I can show you if you want to look before the snow gets deeper. He said he wanted to look. They walked the fence line in the afternoon light, and she showed him the posts, and he crouched beside them and worked the heel of one with his hand to test its give. And she watched him work and thought about the word willing. How he had asked if she was willing, not whether she could, not whether she would, and understood that this was probably a distinction that did not occur to him, which made it mean more, not less. February came and the snow held, and they settled into the particular rhythm of 2 people who have stopped performing courtesy for each other and started simply occupying a shared space with good sense. She baked on Tuesdays and left something on his step. He filled her wood box without being asked, and she stopped mentioning it when he did. They were not in each other's way, and they were not separate either, and she did not have a word for what they were. And she found she did not reach for one. She had begun to know his small habits the way you know the habits of a place you live in. That he ate breakfast before sunrise, that he went to the barn last thing before dark, that he read in the evenings by the front window until the lamp was low, that he never raised his voice, not even when the gelding kicked a board out of the barn stall in January, and he had to patch it in the dark. She had known men who raised their voices over smaller things. She was aware of the silence where the voice would have been. One evening, she was crossing the yard with a pan she had borrowed, and she could see him through the window, reading in his chair, the lamp making a low gold light around him, and she stopped in the cold for a moment because she was calculating something. She was calculating the number of times in 39 days she had gone to sleep without listening for footsteps. The number was 39. She walked back to the cabin and stoked the fire, and did not think about it further, because she had not yet decided what it meant, only that it meant something. The first real thaw came on a Thursday in late February, sudden and honest, the way thaws came in that country. No warning, just one morning the eaves were dripping and the ground had a smell to it, and by afternoon the mud was deep enough to take a boot. She was in the yard when she heard the sound of a wagon on the road, and she looked up, and she knew before she could see who it was by the particular slump in the driver's seat. Holt Granger had a way of sitting in a wagon she would have known from half a mile. She stood where she was. She did not move toward the cabin, and she did not move toward the house. She stood in the yard with a pot in her hands and watched the wagon come down the road and stop at the gate. He climbed down and came through the gate and stopped when he saw her. He had the look of a man who had done arithmetic, arrived at an answer, and come to collect. Time to come home, he said. He had used to use a shortening of her middle name, a habit she had long since stopped correcting, because correcting it had taken energy she used for other things. She said nothing. Game's a game, Holt said. What he won was a year's service, and I'm willing to pay back the money myself. You don't owe him anything. She was looking at him. She was looking at his shoulders, where the argument lived before it got to his face. His shoulders were tight and squared, which meant he was not here to negotiate. 4 years, she said, because that was what she was thinking about. What? That's how long I've been watching your shoulders, she said, so I know when to get out of the way. He looked at her, the way he always looked at her when she said something that cost him time to understand. Behind her, she heard the main house door open and the sound of boots on the porch steps and then gravel, and she knew without turning that he had come out to stand in the yard. She did not turn, she kept her eyes on Holt. "She's not going with you," a voice said behind her, level, without rise or fall, stating a fact the way you state that the frost is coming or the fence needs mending. Holt looked past her, his shoulders shifted. "That's so. That's so." She listened to the silence between the two men and did what she had always done with silences. She waited to see what they were made of. Holt looked at her one more time, the look of a man doing final sums. Then he turned around and walked back through the gate and climbed back up into the wagon and sat with his back to the yard, the particular slump returning to his shoulders, smaller now. She watched the wagon until it turned at the bend and was gone. Then she turned around. He was standing at the edge of the yard with his hands at his sides, and he looked at her the way he had looked at her across the card table the first night. Not with heat or asking, just watching to see what she needed. She looked at the mud in the yard, then at the fence line where the posts were heeled over, then back at him. "The south fence post," she said. "The ground'll be soft enough by next week." He was quiet for a moment. She watched his face find what she had said and turn it over. "It will," he said. She nodded once. She went back to the cabin with her pot, and behind her she could hear him cross the yard to the barn, slow and unhurried, the sound of a man who has come back to what he was doing. She set the pot on the stove, she built the fire up. She stood at the window with the latch on it, and looked out at the mud and the dripping eaves, and the fence line she could not see from here, but knew was there, and she thought that she had been building something for the last 42 days, without knowing what it was called, and that she still did not have a name for it, and that it was possible she did not need one. Outside, the thaw had made the creek audible again. She could hear it through the walls, just barely, running over the rocks where for 2 months there had been only ice. She let the sound settle in. Then she began to think about what to make for supper, and whether the beans in the root cellar would stretch another week, and whether the south fence posts would want new wire or just new bracing. And all of it felt like the same question answered the same way. One day at a time, one thing at a time, one hand to the next piece of work. She put the pot on the heat, the fire took,